I still remember the sound of that door closing. Not a slam. No, she was too calculated for that. It was a soft click, the kind that echoes louder than any scream because it's final. Deliberate. My son stood behind her in the hallway of what used to be my parents' house, his eyes on the floor, his hands shoved deep in his pockets like a child who knows he's done something wrong but won't admit it. "I think it's best if you don't come around anymore, Margaret," she said. Her voice was sweet, almost apologetic, but her eyes were cold as January rain. "We need our space, our boundaries. I'm sure you understand." I didn't understand. How could I? That house, those walls, that garden, the creaking stairs that sang the same song for 40 years. It wasn't just a house. It was my mother's laughter in the kitchen, my father's hands building the porch swing. It was every Christmas morning, every birthday cake, every tear wiped away at that dining room table. And now this woman, who'd been in my son's life for barely 3 years, stood in the doorway like a queen dismissing a servant. I wanted to say something. God, I wanted to say so many things. But when you've raised a boy to be a man, when you've sacrificed weekends and dreams and pieces of yourself to give him a better life, and he stands there silent while his wife erases you, words don't come easy. They stick in your throat like broken glass. So I nodded. I picked up my purse from the chair, my mother's chair, the one she rocked me in when I was small, and I walked to my car. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely get the key in the ignition. I sat there for a moment, staring at that house through tears I refused to let fall until I was out of sight. The rain started as I pulled away. Of course it did. The universe has a sense of timing like that. I drove for an hour without knowing where I was going. Past the grocery store where I used to take my son for ice cream every Friday. Past the park where I taught him to ride a bike, running behind him with my hand on his back, promising I wouldn't let go, and then letting go anyway, because that's what mothers do. We let go even when it breaks us. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex, the sky had turned that bruised purple that comes before nightfall. I sat in my car in the parking lot, watching the rain streak down the windshield, and I let myself feel it. All of it. The rejection, the humiliation, the way my own child had chosen her over me. But underneath the hurt, something else was stirring. Something quiet and cold and patient. See, what she didn't know, what my son had apparently forgotten, was that nothing about that house was in his name. Not the deed, not the title, nothing. Sometimes the people who try to shut you out forget who holds the keys. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, drop a comment and tell me your story. And subscribe, because this is just the beginning. The law office smelled like leather and old paper, the kind of smell that makes you feel small and serious at the same time. I sat across from Thomas Whitmore, my parents' estate attorney, watching him flip through documents with the careful attention of a man who'd spent 40 years making sure people's final wishes were honored. "Your mother was very specific in her instructions, Margaret," he said, looking at me over his reading glasses. "The house was to remain in your name, not your son's. Yours. She wanted to make sure you always had a place to come back to." I felt something crack inside my chest. My mother had passed 2 years ago, 6 months after my father. The grief had been so heavy, so all-consuming, that I'd barely paid attention to the legal details. My son had asked if he and his new wife could move in, just temporarily, while they saved for their own place. He'd looked at me with those same brown eyes I'd looked into the night he was born, and I'd said yes without thinking twice. "She never transferred the deed?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Thomas shook his head. "The house is yours, Margaret. Legally, completely, undeniably yours. Your son has been living there as your guest. Nothing more." I sat back in the leather chair, feeling the weight of that truth settle over me like a coat I'd forgotten I owned. For months, I'd felt powerless, erased, like I was the one who didn't belong. but I did belong. I'd always belonged. "What are my options?" I asked. Thomas leaned forward, his hands folded on the desk. "You can ask them to leave. You can move back in yourself. You can sell it. It's entirely your decision." He paused, studying my face. "But I'd recommend you think carefully about what you want the outcome to be. Not just legally, but personally." I drove home that afternoon with the deed in my purse, the paper heavy as stone. I didn't go straight to the house. Not yet. Instead, I sat in my small apartment, staring at the document that proved what I'd always known, but had been made to doubt. I had value. I had rights. I had power. The next morning, I woke up before dawn, made myself coffee in the dim blue light of early morning, and I made a decision. I wasn't going to rage. I wasn't going to show up screaming or crying or begging to be let back in. I was going to do something much more powerful. I was going to reclaim what was mine with the quiet dignity my mother had taught me. I wrote the letter by hand. Something about typing it felt too cold, too corporate. This needed to be personal. My mother always said that if something mattered, you wrote it in your own handwriting so the person could feel your presence in every word. "Dear Rebecca and James, I'm writing to inform you that I will be moving back into the house at 428 Maple Street within the next 30 days. As the legal owner of the property, I believe it's time I return to my family home. I understand this may come as a surprise. I'm happy to discuss the transition and give you adequate time to make other arrangements. Please contact me at your earliest convenience. Sincerely, Margaret." I didn't mention her words at the door. I didn't bring up the way I'd been dismissed like hired help. I didn't have to. The letter said everything that needed to be said. I mailed it on a Tuesday morning, standing at the post office counter with my hand trembling slightly as I pushed the envelope across to the clerk. There was no going back now. For 3 days, I heard nothing. Silence. The kind that feels like the air before a thunderstorm. And then my phone rang. It was James, my son. His voice was tight, confused, almost accusatory. "Mom, what is this? What are you talking about, moving back in? This is our home." Our home, not my home, not even acknowledging it had been my parents' home first. "James," I said, keeping my voice steady even though my heart was hammering. "The house is in my name. It always has been. I let you stay there because you needed a place, but I never signed it over to you." There was a long pause. I could hear Rebecca in the background, her voice sharp and insistent, though I couldn't make out the words. "You're kicking us out?" he finally said, and there was something in his voice. Hurt, yes, but also disbelief, like he couldn't fathom that I would stand up for myself. "I'm moving back into my house," I corrected. "I'm giving you 30 days to find somewhere else." "That's more than fair. Mom, we don't have the money to. Rebecca's pregnant." The world stopped. Pregnant. I was going to be a grandmother, and I was finding out like this. Over the phone, in the middle of an argument about property lines. I closed my eyes, took a breath. "Congratulations," I said quietly. "I mean that. But it doesn't change the situation, James. I need to come home." He hung up without saying goodbye. I sat on my couch for a long time after that, staring at my phone, wondering if I'd just burned a bridge I'd spent 30 years building. But then I remembered that door closing in my face, the way she'd looked at me like I was nothing, and I knew I'd made the right choice. You know what they say, you don't know what you've got till it's taken away. If this story is hitting close to home, let me know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe, because we're about to enter the storm. She showed up at my apartment on a Saturday afternoon. I was folding laundry, the TV murmuring in the background, when I heard the knock. Sharp, insistent, the kind of knock that demands to be answered. I knew who it was before I opened the door. Rebecca stood there in designer jeans and a cream-colored sweater, her highlighted hair pulled back in a perfect ponytail. She looked every bit the young, successful woman who'd swept my son off his feet. Polished, confident, completely in control. Except her eyes. Her eyes were furious. "We need to talk," she said, not waiting for an invitation before stepping past me into my small living room. I closed the door slowly, gathering myself. I'd imagined this moment a dozen times since mailing that letter. I'd rehearsed what I'd say, how I'd stand my ground. But now, with her in my space, my heart was racing. "Would you like to sit down?" I asked, my voice calmer than I felt. "No." She turned to face me, arms crossed. "What you're doing is cruel, Margaret. We have a baby coming. We've built a life in that house. You can't just rip it away from us." "I'm not ripping anything away," I said quietly. "I'm reclaiming what was always mine." "Because of what I said?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Are you really that petty?" "I was having a bad day and I set a boundary. That's healthy. That's what therapists recommend." A boundary. That's what she was calling it. "You told me I wasn't welcome in my own mother's house," I said. And for the first time, I let her hear the hurt underneath the words. "You shut the door in my face while my son stood there silent. You made me feel like I was nothing." "That's not—" she started, but I held up my hand. "I'm not here to argue about feelings, Rebecca. The legal reality is simple. The house is mine. I've given you 30 days. That's more than generous." Her face changed then. The Polish cracked. Underneath, I saw something desperate and raw. "We don't have anywhere to go," she whispered. "Do you understand that? We've spent everything we have fixing up that house, making it ours. James's job barely covers our bills. We can't afford first and last month's rent somewhere else. You're about to make your own grandchild homeless." The words hit like a punch. I felt the guilt rise up, hot and familiar. The mother guilt that says you're supposed to sacrifice everything, always, forever, no matter what it costs you. But then I thought about my mother, the way she'd held my hand before she died and said, "Don't let anyone make you small, baby girl, not even family." "I'm sorry you're in this position," I said. "Truly. But you should have thought about that before you treated me like I didn't matter." She stared at me for a long moment. Then she smiled, and it was the coldest smile I'd ever seen. "You're going to regret this," she said softly. "James will never forgive you. You're choosing a house over your son, over your grandchild, and everyone will know what kind of person you really are." She left without another word, the door closing behind her with that same soft click that had started all of this. I sank onto my couch, my hands shaking, and I wondered if she was right. Was I the villain in this story? Or was I finally, after 53 years, learning how to be the heroine of my own life? The days after Rebecca's visit felt like walking through fog. Heavy. Disorienting. I kept expecting my phone to ring, expecting James to call, expecting something to break the awful silence that had settled between us. But there was nothing. I went to work at the hospital where I'd been a nurse for 28 years. I smiled at patients. I checked vitals. I held hands with scared elderly women who reminded me of my mother. And the whole time, I felt like I was moving through water, everything muffled and far away. My coworker, Denise, found me in the break room one afternoon, staring at my untouched sandwich. "You gonna eat that? Or are you planning to telepathically absorb the nutrients?" she asked, sliding into the chair across from me. I tried to smile. Failed. "Talk to me, Maggie," she said, her voice gentle. Denise had been my friend for 15 years. She'd seen me through my parents' deaths, through my divorce, through every hard thing. She knew when something was wrong, so I told her. All of it. The dismissal at the door, the deed, the letter, Rebecca's visit, the silence. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. just looking at me with those wise brown eyes that had seen too much in her 60 years. "You know what your problem is?" she finally said. "You keep waiting for permission to take up space. You keep thinking you need to justify your right to exist in your own life. I'm not—" "You are," she interrupted. "That girl told you to disappear, and you almost did. You almost let her erase you. And now that you're standing up for yourself, you're second-guessing whether you have the right to do it." I felt tears sting my eyes. "What if I'm wrong, Dee? What if I'm destroying my relationship with my son over pride?" "Is it pride?" she asked. "Or is it self-respect? Because those are two very different things, baby." I didn't have an answer. That night, I drove past the house on Maple Street. I told myself I wasn't going to, but my car seemed to steer itself there, like it remembered the way home even when I was trying to forget. The lights were on in the living room. I could see shadows moving behind the curtains. James and Rebecca, living their life in the space my parents had built. My son, who I'd rocked to sleep in that very room. My son, who was choosing her over me. I sat in my car across the street, engine off, windows down. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of the honeysuckle that grew wild along the back fence. My father had planted it the year I was born. Every spring, it bloomed like a promise. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for the lights to go off one by one. Long enough for the house to go dark and still. And I realized something sitting there in the darkness. I wasn't just fighting for a house. I was fighting for the right to be seen, to be valued, to be more than just a footnote in someone else's story. My mother had left me that house because she knew. She knew I'd need a place to belong when the world tried to make me feel like I didn't. I started the car and drove home, and for the first time in days, I felt something like peace. I was making coffee on a Wednesday morning when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. These days, unknown numbers usually meant spam calls or bad news, but something made me pick up. "Margaret? Margaret Collins?" The voice was male, older, uncertain. "Yes," I said cautiously. "This is Robert Henderson. I don't know if you remember me. I was friends with your parents back in the day. I used to come by the house for your dad's poker nights. Robert Henderson." The name pulled up a memory. A tall man with kind eyes and a booming laugh, sitting at our kitchen table with my father, cards spread between them, smoke from my father's pipe curling toward the ceiling. "Mr. Henderson," I said, surprised. "Of course I remember. How are you?" "I'm well, thank you." "Listen, I heard through the grapevine, you know how this town is, that you're having some trouble with the house on Maple Street, with your son and his wife." I felt my defenses rise. "I don't think that's really—" "I'm not calling to gossip," he said gently. "I'm calling because I want you to know something. Your mother and I had a conversation, must have been about 6 months before she passed. She was worried about you. Said you were too soft, too willing to give pieces of yourself away. She made me promise that if anything ever happened, if anyone ever tried to take advantage of your kindness, I'd remind you what she told me." I sank into a kitchen chair, my coffee forgotten. "What did she tell you?" "She said, 'Robert, my Margaret has the biggest heart of anyone I know, but she doesn't understand yet that love without boundaries is just self-destruction. She wanted you to know that standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's survival." I felt tears slip down my cheeks. "She said that?" "Those exact words. Your mama was a wise woman, Margaret, and she knew you better than you know yourself." He paused. "I also wanted you to know that what you're doing, reclaiming your home, it's not cruel. It's necessary. Don't let anyone make you doubt that." We talked for a few more minutes, reminiscing about my parents, about the old days. When we hung up, I sat there in my kitchen with the morning light streaming through the windows, and I felt my mother's presence so strongly, it was like she was sitting across from me. Love without boundaries is just self-destruction. How many years had I spent destroying myself, little by little, thinking that's what love required? You ever get a sign from the universe exactly when you need it? Tell me about it in the comments. And subscribe if you believe in second chances, because mine is just beginning. The moving truck arrived on a Saturday morning, exactly 30 days after I'd sent the letter. I'd hired professionals this time. I wasn't 20 anymore, and I didn't need to prove I could do everything myself. I arrived at the house at 8 a.m. James's car was still in the driveway. Rebecca's beside it. My stomach twisted. I'd hoped they'd be gone by now, that we could avoid this final confrontation. But apparently, the universe had other plans. I walked up the path I'd walked 1,000 times as a child, as a young mother, as a daughter saying goodbye to her parents one last time. The garden was different now. Rebecca had put in modern planters, removed my mother's roses, but the bones of the place were the same, the soul of it. I knocked on my own door, waited. James opened it. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, his hair uncombed. Behind him, I could see boxes stacked in the hallway. "Mom," he said, and there was so much in that one word. Hurt, anger, resignation. "James," I replied. "I see you're packing. That's good. The movers will need to get started soon." "Rebecca's upstairs," he said. This has been really hard on her. On us. I wanted to say that it had been hard on me too. That being rejected by your own child leaves a wound that doesn't heal with time. But I just nodded. "Where will you go?" I asked instead. "Rebecca's parents found us a rental. It's small, expensive, but it'll work until..." He trailed off, not finishing the thought. Until what? Until I died? Until he could claim this house the way he'd been assuming he would all along. I moved past him into the house, and the smell hit me like a wave. Coffee and vanilla candles and something else. Something that wasn't quite right. They'd changed things. Painted the walls. Removed the pictures of my parents. Tried to erase the history and replace it with their own. But underneath, I could still feel it. Home. Rebecca came down the stairs carrying a box. When she saw me, she stopped. For a moment, we just looked at each other. Two women fighting over the same space, the same man, the same definition of family. "I hope you're happy," she said, her voice brittle. "You've gotten your revenge. I hope it keeps you warm at night." "This isn't revenge," I said quietly. "This is survival." She set the box down with more force than necessary. "You know what I think? I think you're a bitter old woman who can't stand to see her son happy with someone else. This isn't about the house. It's about control." Something in me snapped. "You're right," I said, and I watched her eyes widen in surprise. "It is about control. Specifically, my right to have control over my own life, my own property, my own dignity. You took that from me when you shut that door in my face. When you made me feel like I didn't belong in the place where I was born. So yes, I'm taking back control. And if that makes me bitter, so be it." James stepped between us. "Mom, please, can we get through this day without more fighting?" And suddenly I was so tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of justifying. Tired of being made to feel like the villain for refusing to be a victim. "Fine," I said. "The movers will be here in an hour. Make sure everything of yours is clearly marked." I walked through the house while they finished packing, touching walls, running my hand along the banister, standing in the room that used to be mine as a girl. The movers arrived. Boxes were loaded. Furniture was carried out. By 2 p.m., it was done. James found me in the kitchen, the last room to be emptied of their things. "I don't know if I can forgive you for this," he said. I looked at my son. This man I'd raised, this person I'd sacrificed so much for, and I felt something shift inside me. "I know," I said, "and I'm sorry you feel that way. But I'm not sorry for choosing myself. Not anymore." He left without hugging me, without saying goodbye. And I stood in my mother's kitchen, in my kitchen now, and I let myself cry. Sometimes love means letting go. Sometimes it means holding on. The trick is knowing which is which. Drop a like if you're still with me, because we're not done yet. The house was too quiet. I'd forgotten how silence sounds when you're alone in a place that used to be filled with people. Every creak of the floorboards, every settling of the old bones of the house seemed amplified, echoing through empty rooms. I'd brought some of my furniture from the apartment, but it looked small and out of place in these bigger rooms. My little couch that fit perfectly in my living room looked lost against the wall where my parents' sofa used to be. My bed, set up in my old room, felt like playing pretend, like I was a child again, sleeping in the same space but nothing was the same. I made dinner for one in the kitchen where my mother had cooked for dozens. The stove was the same. She'd refused to replace it even when it got finicky. Said she knew its moods like she knew her own. I stood there cooking eggs, and I could almost hear her voice. Not too much heat, baby. Eggs need patience. I ate at the table where I'd done my homework, where I'd told my parents I was pregnant at 19, where I'd signed my divorce papers 10 years later. The table had stories carved into it, not literally, but I could see them there anyway. Ghost memories. After dinner, I walked through the house, room by room, relearning it. The living room, where my father used to fall asleep in his recliner watching westerns. The TV volume too loud because he refused to admit he was going deaf. The bathroom where my mother would soak for hours, reading romance novels and drinking wine, the door locked, taking the only time she ever took for herself. The small bedroom that had been James's, where I'd rocked him through colic, through nightmares, through the fever that had scared me so badly I'd slept on his floor for a week. They'd painted it gray, turned it into an office. The glow-in-the-dark stars I'd put on his ceiling were gone. I ended up in the backyard as the sun set. The honeysuckle was blooming, filling the air with sweetness. I sat on the porch swing, the same one my father built, miraculously still there, and I pushed off gently, letting the rhythm soothe me. My phone buzzed. A text from Denise. "How's the first night in your castle, Queen?" I smiled, typing back. "Lonely, but mine." 3 dots appeared, then her response. "Sometimes lonely, and mine is better than crowded and lost. You did the right thing." Did I? I still wasn't sure. As darkness fell, I went back inside, locked the doors, turned off the lights. I stood in the hallway between the kitchen and the living room, the heart of the house, the place where you could hear everything happening in every direction, and I spoke into the darkness. "Mama," I said quietly. "Daddy, I'm home. I'm finally home." The house didn't answer, but somehow I felt less alone. 3 weeks after I moved in, someone knocked on my door just after sunset. I wasn't expecting anyone. I'd been keeping to myself, still raw from everything that had happened, not quite ready to face the world. I looked through the peephole and my breath caught. James. He was alone, standing on the porch with his hands in his pockets, looking younger than his 31 years. For a moment, I considered not answering. I wasn't ready for another fight, another accusation, another reminder that I'd chosen property over family. But he was my son, and despite everything, I loved him with a fierceness that hadn't dimmed even slightly. I opened the door. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly. "Hi, baby," I replied, and felt my throat tighten. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside, and he entered the house he'd grown up visiting. The house he'd lived in for 3 years, now strange to him as a guest in his mother's space. We sat in the living room, on my small couch that still looked out of place. The silence stretched between us, heavy with all the words we hadn't said. "Rebecca doesn't know I'm here," he finally said. "She'd be furious if she did." "Then why did you come?" He looked down at his hands. "Because I needed to see you. Because I've been thinking about everything that happened and He took a breath. I owe you an apology. I hadn't expected that. James, let me finish, he said. Please. I've been rehearsing this for days, and if I don't say it now, I never will. I nodded, my heart hammering. I stood there, he said, his voice cracking. I stood there when Rebecca told you that you weren't welcome, and I didn't say anything. I let her treat you like you didn't matter. Like all the sacrifices you made raising me alone. All the nights you worked double shifts so I could have what I needed. Like none of that counted for anything. He looked up, and his eyes were wet. I was a coward, Mom. And I'm so sorry. Tears spilled down my cheeks. Why didn't you say something then? Because I was trying to keep the peace. Because Rebecca has these moods. These moments where if I don't agree with her, she shuts down for days. Because I thought it would blow over. That you'd understand. That... He shook his head. Because I took you for granted. I assumed you'd always be there, always forgive me, always put me first. Even when I didn't deserve it. You're my son, I whispered. I'll always love you. But love doesn't mean doormat, he said. You taught me that. You taught me to stand up for myself, to know my worth. And then I watched you forget your own lessons. He wiped his eyes. When you sent that letter, I was so angry. I thought you were being cruel. But Rebecca's parents helped me see it differently. Her dad actually said, Son, your mother is teaching you a valuable lesson about respect. He said that? James nodded. He's been married to Rebecca's mom for 35 years. He said the biggest mistake young couples make is not honoring the people who came before them. That family isn't just about the future. It's about remembering where you came from. We sat quietly for a moment, the old house settling around us. Are you and Rebecca okay? I asked. We're working on it. The new place is actually good for us. Smaller. Humbling. It's teaching us to live within our means. To appreciate what we have instead of always wanting more. He smiled sadly. Turns out losing this house was the wake-up call we needed. And the baby? His face softened. Due in October. It's a girl. My heart swelled. A granddaughter. We want to name her Eleanor, he said. After Grandma, if that's okay with you. I started crying again, unable to speak. Mom, I know I have no right to ask this, but... He took a breath. Is there any way we can start over? Not moving back in. That ship has sailed, and honestly, it needed to. But maybe... coffee? Visits? Letting you be part of your granddaughter's life? I reached across the couch and took my son's hand. The hand I'd held when he took his first steps. The hand that had grown bigger than mine without me noticing. Yes, I said. Yes, baby, of course. He hugged me then, and it felt like being whole again. 6 months later, I stood in the garden planting my mother's roses. I'd found the same variety at a nursery 2 towns over. Old-fashioned climbing roses in deep red, the kind that smell like perfume and memory. The woman at the nursery had warned me they'd take time to establish, that I might not see blooms until next season. I didn't mind waiting. The house had slowly become mine again. I'd repainted the walls in soft colors my mother would have loved. I'd hung old pictures, my parents on their wedding day, James as a baby, me as a girl with pigtails and missing teeth. I'd bought new furniture that fit the space, that felt like it belonged. Denise came over most Sundays. We'd sit on the porch swing with coffee, watching the world wake up, talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes Robert Henderson would stop by with groceries, refusing to let me pay him back, saying it's what my father would have wanted. And James visited. Not every week, but enough. He and Rebecca were doing better. She'd even apologized to me one awkward afternoon, her pride clearly wounded, but her words sincere. I'd accepted it, though trust would take longer to rebuild than roses take to bloom. They'd brought Eleanor to meet me when she was 2 weeks old. I'd held my granddaughter in the same room where I'd held my son 31 years earlier. and the circle had felt complete in a way I hadn't expected. "She looks like you, Mom," James had said, and I'd seen it too. My mother's eyes, looking out from this new little face. Legacy living on. As I patted soil around the rose bushes, I thought about everything that had happened. The door closing in my face, the letter, the painful reclaiming, the broken relationship slowly mending. People in town had opinions, of course. They always do. Some thought I'd been cruel. Others thought I'd been brave. Most didn't say anything to my face, but whispered plenty behind my back. I'd learned not to care. This house wasn't just property. It was proof that I existed, that I mattered, that my parents' lives had meant something, and my life meant something, and you don't have to erase yourself to make room for other people. Love without boundaries is self-destruction. My mother had known that. Now I knew it too. As I stood up, brushing dirt from my knees, I noticed a car pulling up. Rebecca's car. My heart rate picked up. We were still navigating this new relationship carefully, like people learning to walk on ice. But when she got out, she was smiling, carrying a casserole dish. "I made too much lasagna," she said as she approached. "Thought you might want some?" It was an offering. An olive branch wrapped in pasta and cheese. "I'd love some," I said. "Come in. I'll make coffee." We sat at the kitchen table and she looked around with an expression I couldn't quite read. "The house looks beautiful," she said finally. "It looks like it's supposed to look. Thank you." "I'm sorry," she said suddenly. "Not just for what I said that day, but for trying to erase your parents' memory, your history. I was so focused on making it ours that I forgot it was yours first." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "We're learning. All of us." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "Eleanor's going to love coming here." Growing up hearing stories about her great-grandparents, learning where her daddy came from. And in that moment, I saw the future I'd been afraid I'd lost forever. Sunday dinners, birthdays, Eleanor taking her first steps in this living room, teaching her to garden in the same soil where my mother taught me. "She will," I agreed. "This house has a lot of stories left to tell." After Rebecca left, I walked back out to the garden. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. I could smell the honeysuckle, stronger now in the evening air. The rose bushes stood small and vulnerable in the soil, their roots just beginning to take hold. They would grow. In time, they would bloom. They would climb the fence my father built and fill the air with the same sweetness I remembered from childhood. And my granddaughter would grow up knowing that scent, making her own memories here, adding her own chapter to this house's story. I sat on the porch swing and pulled out my phone. There was a message from James. "Thank you for giving us another chance, Mom. I love you." I typed back, "I love you too, baby. Always have. Always will." But this time, love had boundaries. This time, love included respect. This time, love didn't require me to disappear. As darkness fell, I didn't feel lonely. I felt full of memory and hope and hard-won peace. I'd fought for this place, this space, this right to exist on my own terms, and I'd won. Not just the house, but something far more valuable. I'd won myself back. The wind picked up, rustling through the leaves, and I swear I could hear my mother's voice in it. "That's my girl. That's my strong, beautiful girl." I stayed on the swing until the stars came out. The same stars I'd wished on as a child. The same stars my granddaughter would wish on someday. The house behind me was dark except for the porch light, glowing warm and steady like a lighthouse guiding people home. And I realized something sitting there under that vast sky. This wasn't the end of my story. It wasn't even close. I was 53 years old, and I was just beginning to understand what it meant to live. Not for others, not in the margins of someone else's life, but fully, completely, unapologetically myself. The door that had closed in my face had been the beginning, not the ending. It had forced me to remember who I was before I became someone's mother, someone's ex-wife, someone's daughter. It had reminded me that Margaret Collins was a person in her own right, with value and worth that didn't depend on anyone else's validation. I thought about all the women who'd feel this story in their bones. The mothers who'd been made to feel like they were asking too much by simply asking to be seen. The daughters trying to honor their parents' legacies. The grandmothers fighting to stay relevant in families that had moved on without them. To them, I wanted to say, don't disappear. Don't make yourself small. Don't convince yourself that love requires erasure. Stand in your truth. Reclaim your space. Plant your roses and wait for them to bloom, because you deserve to take up room in this world. You deserve to be more than a footnote. You deserve to come home to yourself. I went inside finally, locking the door behind me. My door, my lock, my choice. I made myself tea in my mother's favorite mug. I sat at the table where generations of my family had gathered, and I felt them there with me. Not as ghosts, but as roots, as foundation, as proof that I came from somewhere, that I belonged to something bigger than myself. My phone buzzed with a notification. Someone had commented on a post Denise had convinced me to make about the house, about starting over, about second chances. The comment said, "Thank you for sharing this. I needed to hear it today. You gave me courage." I smiled, tears in my eyes again, but they were different tears now. Not grief or anger or hurt, just fullness, gratitude, the sweet ache of being alive and awake and present. I typed back, "You already had the courage. I just reminded you where to find it." And then I turned off my phone, finished my tea, and climbed the stairs to bed. My bed. In my house. In my life that I'd fought to reclaim. The last thing I did before sleep was whisper into the darkness, "Thank you, Mama, for teaching me that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to disappear, for leaving me more than just a house. You left me permission to exist." The house creaked and settled around me, and I closed my eyes. Tomorrow, I'd wake up in this place that was mine. I'd make coffee and tend my garden and maybe call my son. I'd live another day in the life I'd reclaimed, one small choice at a time. But tonight, I rested. Not in victory or defeat, but in something simpler and more profound. In the quiet certainty that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Home. Finally, truly home. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you of your own battles or your own journey back to yourself, I want to hear about it. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what part of this story hit closest to home. Subscribe if you believe in women who refuse to be erased. Share this if you know someone who needs to hear it. Because our stories matter, our voices matter, we matter. And sometimes, the most revolutionary act is simply refusing to disappear. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Thank you for witnessing this journey. Until next time, remember, you are not too much. You are not asking for too much. You deserve to bloom exactly where you're planted. This is your narrator, reminding you that every ending is just a new beginning waiting to unfold. The story of Margaret Collins, a woman who lost her place, fought to reclaim it, and discovered that home isn't just a location. It's the courage to stand in your truth, even when the people you love most try to write you out of the narrative.